Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Sean Tufts, managing partner at Optiv, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live session. This is brought to you by Optiv, the cyber advisor and security solution leader. I always flub over that. We're here today to talk through ransomware, and we do this on LinkedIn. We do this on LinkedIn because our community is here. Every professional connection I've pretty much ever had is here, and we want you guys to be a part of this. So please, we're watching the message window. We're looking for feedback. We're looking for questions. So please don't hesitate to put them into that window. I'll be monitoring them, and maybe there's something we pick up real time. And then at the end, we're going to have a big Q&A session. So please be active there. Again, that's why we like LinkedIn Live, because we can get that feedback. We're here today to talk about ransomware. This is the trend that never cycles down. I remember 15 years ago, the first time I heard the word ransomware.
Yeah.
And at the time, we were dealing with what? We were dealing with website takedowns and defacements. We were dealing with big data dumps and actual ransoming on that blackmail kind of approach. And since then, every year it just keeps getting bigger. In IT security, a lot of things that happen are kind of campaigns. They cycle down, they cycle up. There's a new trend, and then it sunsets. But this one's kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. Also, it's been a big business. The reason it's been moving is because it's profitable. And it seems like these days, no entity is really safe from being a target, safe from being extorted. One of the things I think that is positive is that we're starting to see positive traction. We've got global enforcement agencies taking down groups. Lockbit got taken down earlier this year. And there is successes here, which is really good to celebrate. So our goal today is to talk with some experts. We've got Curtis and Jim here to talk to us about how we approach ransomware. And that's our goal today. Pull these things out on the table, talk about what things are going well, what things are a struggle, and how to respond if you're impacted. So here with me today are our two SMEs. We've got Curtis Fletchner. He's a professional incident responder with more than 19 years experience doing malware analysis, threat intel, building IR programs. Curtis, you want to say hello?
Hey, everybody. Like Sean said, my name is Curtis Fechner. I'm an engineering fellow here at Optiv. So I basically work in our incident response and threat intelligence groups. And I do stuff like this these days.
That's a good sign. That means you're doing the right work. All right. Also with us is James Turgill. James is the former cybersecurity leader and chief information officer at the FBI. James, do you want to give a quick hello?
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. Welcome, everybody. 22 years in the FBI, started working cyber when cyber started, right, in 2000, 2002. Worked it all through my career and ended my career as the FBI's global chief information officer.
I love this panel because we have one suit coat, one sweater, and one Patagonia vest. That seems like the trifecta of IT security.
We nailed it.
Nailed it. All right, let's get into the first question here. Let's start at the beginning. Last night, I'm watching the Nuggets game. On my phone, I get a text message, a smishing campaign, right? It was a perfect text, too. It was a package delivery, don't have your address, here's a link, from a phone number I didn't recognize. It was actually an email address, .asia, which I thought was suspicious. They're getting better. It still feels like the easy way in for the actors is still through phishing, still through getting that access foothold. James, is that what you're seeing? It's still the simple ways people are getting in?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, right, the older tricks are the best tricks. But the cyber threat actors have now created and evolved into this connected ecosystem. We talk about gig economies with our normal lives, but the cyber threat actors have created a gig economy here with ransomware as a service. Basically pushing it out to individual items, individual aspects of an attack that they're handing off. Like initial access brokers will come in and actually do the initial access to the organization, and then they'll hand it off. And you also have the business email compromise piece, like you're talking about, phishing, smishing, right, and even video aspects as well. One of the most recent attacks or recent law enforcement actions, LabHost, is a phishing service, phishing as a platform service that was just taken down a week or two ago with 40,000 domains and 37 arrests. So the law enforcement's trying to get ahead of this, but it's difficult when you parse this out, right? The whole ransomware as a service group pushes the escalation to different organizations, right? There's a handoff from an access broker to a ransomware as a service affiliate, right? And then there's another organization or another group or individual, and sometimes who will actually launch the malware or detonate the ransomware. And then you've even got situations where these organizations actually have like tools to help the initial access brokers. They've industrialized this and monetized it to the point where some of these organizations actually have call centers that for victims, and the ability to provide decryption care and negotiation. It's a whole gig economy now.
Boy, I wonder if that makes being a hacker less appealing if you're working at a call center service desk support. Hi, ransomware, how may I help you?
Right? It's sad.
It's sad, but it's also making it a lot more dangerous.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, getting that initial foothold is still a service, and there's people who are specializing in that.
Yeah.
How do they go lateral? Curtis, I think you've got a lot of experience with how once you get that initial footprint, you get wider. What's that look like?
Yeah, kind of a variable thing, right? So there's kind of two parts to this. I think when we talk about most ransomware attacks, there's sort of the first part, which is you talked about that initial access, getting some sort of a foothold. That's usually command and control malware or something like that. That's sort of the straightforward part. That might be the part where you have the handoff from the initial access broker or somewhere kind of contemporaneous to that, pardon me. So usually there's a few things going on at the same time. They're trying to get that kind of that lay of the land and do some reconnaissance on the inside of the network, figure out where everything is, all the fun stuff, start going for good credentials. Since we're usually talking about some sort of access either on a vulnerable workstation that they got some malware on, or these days like a unpatched VPN server or something on the edge. The whole goal from there is to start getting somewhere more interesting that gives them the ability really to work at scale, right? So the classic example that I know a lot of my friends on the red teaming side of the industry go for is like going for domain admin in Active Directory environments, trying to get DA, trying to get on the domain controllers, or get that level of credentialed access or something equivalent. Also trying to find where your VMware ESXi servers are, things like that, where your backups live, all the fun stuff. But the basic idea for them is to get as much control as possible so that when they go to actually roll out the ransomware payload itself, they're working at scale. They're not just encrypting like 15 years ago when it was just like one computer and it was just ransomware off to a computer and that's that. Now it's I want to use my ransomware payload to encrypt, I don't know, a couple thousand everything. So that's kind of the principle of it beyond that. But as far as how they move internally within the network, most of the time it boils down to credentials, getting superior credentials, getting DA or some sort of other access like that, and then just using authenticated methods to move around rather than trying to introduce more and more new code and new things that can be detected.
And once you get that foothold and you compromise a really great credential, it's a lot harder to be seen, right? How does a defender see that when someone does have a valid credential but is doing malicious acts?
Obviously, it depends a little bit on the nature of controls that exist in an environment. Enterprises with a lot of investment in security tooling are probably going to have some identity management tools, things like that give them better insights and better log data, things like that, to help them see that something's anomalous or something weird is going on. If you don't have the fortune of having some of those tools, that might be a little more challenging. You frankly may not see it, unfortunately, until bad stuff happens.
Yeah, we've actually seen here at Optiv, our identity group is one of the fastest growing because of that issue, and really ironing out what someone should have access to, honing those worlds down inside the corporate environment so you don't get everything.
Absolutely.
Right. Let's talk about motivation. This is still a money game, right? People are still doing this strictly for the payola part, right?
Yeah.
What do we see from a maturity perspective there? Because we've got a lot of different environments. James, you mentioned the gig economy. There are some guys just sitting around in their dorm room pulling down ransomware and throwing it out there. There's state-sponsored entities. What do you guys see from a sophistication? When you enter into a live ransomware environment, how do you determine if this is a guy in a dorm room or someone in a foreign country?
So, let me take this really quick. I mean, from my experience, and I've worked hundreds of ransomware cases during my FBI years, and certainly now currently with Optiv in my current role. It's honestly looking at how these threat actors are acting and reacting, right? The type of tools that they're using to come in to the initial access brokers that will come in, and how they actually do it. Their ability to either get certain small amount of access based upon an ecosystem versus the more mature nation state threat actors that are very adept at encrypting everything, right? And they'll be very specific about what they exfiltrate. I mean, I've worked cases where the really mature ones are actually exfiltrating the page off your cyber insurance declarations page to show what your cyber insurance coverage is, and putting it actually out on the web, and certainly putting it in front of you as the encryption notice to give you a sense of, hey, I know everything that you're doing. I know what your cyber insurance coverage is. Let's just go ahead and pay now. So there's a real difference in how these organizations move through the system, what they actually encrypt, and how they deal with the victims.
So that first 5 hours, first 12 hours, first 10 hours, you're looking for the sophistication of the actor. And every data point they're giving you, every interaction and touch point is an opportunity to gauge their sophistication, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, I never thought about the ransomware brokers telling you who your insurance agent is. Like, hey, call Dave. That's amazing. Curtis, what do you see from an incident response planning perspective? We're talking about sophistication here.
So one of the biggest challenges that we have is overestimating sophistication sometimes. Generally, our experience when we're working these and when we're helping clients with planning is trying not to get too bogged down in trying to assess how sophisticated or not it is. Most threat actors are going to be as sophisticated as they need to be, depending on the nature of your network, your environment. If you're making it easy, if you've got a lot of default credentials, weak passwords, things like that, there is very little need to actually use more sophisticated technical techniques. But like James said, socially speaking, that's where you're more likely to encounter some really fascinating sort of indicators of just how sophisticated or how professional really somebody is on the bad guy's side. That's probably more than anything the big part of it. When we come down to planning, we can't get bogged down in those details most of the times. We just need to think through the firefighting part of it, actually trying to stop the bleeding, etc. Try to get the bad guys out. I'm oversimplifying, of course, but point being, I've got bigger problems or priorities to work on than trying to hypothesize just how sophisticated these guys are, because I've got a bunch of things that are happening right in front of me, and I need to address that first.
Yeah, so having a good, having that attribution part irrelevant, understanding the sophistication, we need to go back to the basics, right? So we're talking about incident response planning and how to do that and do that right. What are some best practices there on having a good IR plan?
So for something like ransomware, an IR plan alone probably won't be everything you need, but it should start to give you some basics, right? A decision-making framework, sort of a general collection of rules or boundaries just to help you keep the entire incident response process organized, figuring out which stakeholders within a business you need to talk to. Obviously, within a big enterprise, this is a much more complex sort of structure of incident command and relationships with business units, legal entities, things like that. But it is something that even on a smaller business is going to help you figure out, who am I going to call when I need help from the outside? Do I have an incident response retainer? Do I have outside legal representation? Do I have insurance? All these sorts of things, just helping to keep me moving through in a cyclical manner to make decisions and to sort of prompt me to make sure that I'm actually covering all of my bases and I'm not doing this in a completely disorganized and chaotic manner. Human emotion really, even with the best laid plans, can get in our way. So the more that we can actually kind of start to put these together and start to actually practice them a little bit as well and build some reflexive knowledge is absolutely critical for situations like ransomware.
So you're saying you have to be monitoring the tone and tenor of the attacker, but also the tone and tenor of your client, and if they're ready to support this,
absolutely,
over emotional. Interesting.
Yeah, and you have to practice this, right? And you need to understand that what is, when it's go time, right? When you're in the middle of a ransomware attack, some are very slow moving, right? They'll get encrypt certain databases and slowly move through a system. Others, right? It is, you wake up in the morning, come into work, you turn your computer on, right? And you've got a nice red banner that has a countdown clock and says all your data is encrypted. So understanding how to do this, right? What actually is incident response, having practiced it, doing certain easy things like having out of band communications. I've worked a ton of cases where you've got threat actors that have taken down a whole system, and all of the companies are voice over IP, so that's taken down as well. So now you've got individuals sitting with Gmail accounts and using their smartphone and WhatsApp trying to communicate. And that's the last time, that's not the right time to be in the firefighting mode and not have a plan, not having actually practiced it, not having those out of band communications and call trees and having actually run through simulations before, right? You don't want to try to build the airplane while you're flying it.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. Especially when dealing with the human effort there. One of the things we were talking about last week, James, was just the ability to get things like Bitcoin. Some organizations are completely incapable of doing that. And having that conversation ahead of time. What are we going to do when we have this? Do we have a service that can provide that level of a service? Some of those simple parts, the phones you mentioned, are we going to go personal phones? Do we have to go out and buy a couple burners and have them sitting in a FedEx package ready to ship out to our people? Those conversations aren't happening enough from a proactive standpoint that I've seen.
No, they're not at all. Right. And therein lies the problem. You're actually in the middle of the chaos. You're trying to actually do this. Resilience, in and of itself is defined as you being able to have done this before, and you can bounce back very quickly. And unfortunately, that's not the case. There's also a law enforcement side, which is really, really critical, right? When Curtis is talking about having those incident response plans, right? It takes a village, unfortunately, right, to do this. You need to be able to have that outside counsel that has the ability to have Bitcoin crypto wallets. I talk with boards all the time and actually look at them and say, show of hands, who in the room has a cryptocurrency wallet? And maybe one person raises their hand. Who knows how to get one? Nobody raises their hand. So the problem is, even if they want to pay the ransom, and there's a whole legal issue and ethical issue around the payment, they don't even have the ability to, and you have to work that out ahead of time.
Yeah, I was talking to a CISO and they said they had to call their college kid to get some Bitcoin and get advised there. That was the level of sophistication they were at.
Yeah. That's a long time.
All the time. Yeah, it's a common occurrence. James, with your background, let's talk a little bit about the public-private partnership. We mentioned that in the intro. We're seeing a lot more viable support from the centralized agencies for our government and others. What does that look like today?
So this is, look, I worked this for a very long time, and I can tell you from the law enforcement standpoint, in the last probably 7 years, right, law enforcement, whether it's the FBI, CISA, right, and all of our intelligence partners over in the UK, GCHQ, and all of our Five Eyes partners have really gotten around this, right? So, law enforcement, certainly the FBI is far more aggressive than they were, back 10 years ago, actually to the point of being able, like the Colonial Pipeline case, to actually go and track the Bitcoin and recover the Bitcoin from a threat actor. That kind of stuff was unheard of before, but you really you're talking about incident response. You need to have the relationships with the FBI before an attack occurs. You need to know who your local cyber supervisor is and cyber squad, right? You need to be a member of what's called InfraGard, which is a public-private partnership. You need to be a part of the ISACs, or information sharing and analysis centers, right? And they have them based on industry. So being able to have that phone call, person on the other end that who's with the FBI, who works cyber, when you make that phone call, right, you're going to get a ton of help that you wouldn't have otherwise. And it's really critical to have that relationship ahead of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Especially as you're going through, there was a question in the chat on what's the bare minimum of security controls. I think you can turn that question around and say, what's the bare minimum of connections? If you're a corporation, you don't have that public-private partnership. You're not sitting in the ISACs. You don't have the number saved on your phone to the local FBI office. If you're not doing those exercises, then that's going to start getting a lot more scrutiny when something does come down.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And if you're a publicly traded corporation now, based on the new SEC disclosure, cyber disclosure guidelines, if you're not doing those basic items and you are the victim of an attack, the actual enforcement piece that will come from the SEC is going to be way uglier, right, than if you were actually doing these basics.
Yeah, we've had a lot of good LinkedIn Lives on the SEC regulations and what's coming. And I think a lot of people are preparing for that piece. A lot of what we're talking about.
Yeah, if you don't mind if I jump in, something else I might call out here on like baseline requirements and things like that is cyber insurance might actually sort of predefine that for a lot of companies, both large and small. Just in order to have some sort of a cyber insurance policy, they might mandate certain kinds of controls like multi-factor authentication. It may not be the most comprehensive MFA rollout you've ever seen or anything. It's going to be kind of baseline potentially, but there's going to be some of that in play as well. So sometimes these sort of private third-party entities are actually going to have something to say as well before they're willing to help provide their support too, just to ensure that there is that basic level of protection to help reduce their overall risk too, not just yours.
So what we're talking through right now is kind of the first 5 hours, first 8 hours of an incident. Curtis, what does hour 10 look like? What does someone do if they've got a great response plan, they're executing the right things? What does that second and third phase look like?
There's usually a lot of stuff going on at once. Hopefully you've got somebody in command who's kind of a centralized decision-making authority within the organization. They're going to be tying together a lot of the feedback and a lot of the action items that are being pointed out to you by your outside counsel, your insurance firm, most likely at this point. You've probably got somebody who's working as incident command from an outside IR partner perspective. You're starting to put together some action plans, right? What am I going to do to recover? Am I ready to recover? Have I actually gotten the bad guys out adequately enough that I can start to rebuild? Can I rebuild kind of off to the side in a sort of a clean room state? Something like that, trying to get to that point where we're ready to actually start to get back to a point where a business can operate as a business and not as a sort of crippled entity. Where they're completely hamstrung and unable to do their normal jobs.
So starting that restoration process, doing that offline, having your process to do that off or online, whatever.
Yeah, and really that's something you want to try to plan for ahead of time as well, right? Business continuity planning, DR planning, all that fun stuff, all ties right back into your incident response planning. It doesn't exist like just the IR plan in a vacuum. There is just an absolute universe of all of this stuff that has to kind of work in harmony. And so like, James was saying as well, this is why rehearsal is absolutely so critical. Practice is essential because you're taking a lot of moving parts that are really complex and they have all these different sort of dependencies and requirements and key stakeholders, leaders, opinions. And now you got to make them all work together nicely. And you got to do it while you've got all this pressure on you.
Yeah, it's funny. We were in a conversation with the CFO. This was 24 hours after a breach. And the CFO was yelling at himself. Why didn't I secure more budget? Why didn't I do this? And we were like standing off like, whoa, what's happening here? This is a different dynamic.
Save that discussion for a little later. There's a time for the retrospectives.
Yes. All right, let's get into this. A lot of the chat windows, number one, there's a really funny, we got a question right here from Kelly Rosh. How can organizations effectively approach the challenge of balancing proactive measures with operational priorities? So balancing that, we have to keep the lights on, along with we have to get this thing eradicated. How do companies do that well?
Well, I mean, to start with, you have to do the basics. I mean, we're talking about the ability to have, whether it's an IAM solution, whether, identity is a huge issue here. And we always come back to those problems. So understanding what your ecosystem looks like trying to understand and make sure that you're making it as difficult as you can for threat actors to move within your system. Having multi-factor authentication. I mean, doing the basics is going to get you really, really far. Having an IR plan, right? All of those, basic NIST type of, 5 domains of how do we look at our system.
Yeah, it's a really good advice. I think people are starting to ramp up and be ready for that. We got a funny comment here. Someone said foothold as a service sounds like the 2024 bingo card. I love foothold as a service. FAS. What would that be? All right, let's get to the other question. In the other chat, we got 4 or 5 people asking about what does the payment look like? Do you do it? Do you step up and actually pay the ransomware? Do you commit or do you hold back? What do you guys think?
Well, so look, from the law enforcement standpoint, right, the FBI is always going to tell you not to pay the ransom, right? Because what are you doing? You're funding cyber terrorism. You are funding the threat actors. And the only reason why, ransomware continues to increase is because it's monetization, right? Because of the millions and millions of dollars that are being paid out there. But it comes down, I've worked a ton of these, and it comes down to kind of 3 different areas. Yes, they're doing it for the money, but there's also, you don't have to be the intended victim, right? I worked the 2017 NotPetya attack, right? And there was no ransom. It was just wiping systems. So there is that type of wiperware out there. But then there's also the threat actors that you pay the ransom, you get a decryption key, and Curtis knows this better than anybody. The ability to actually decrypt 100% of your data doesn't happen, right? You lose, somewhere between 20 and 30% of your data just because, right, detonating ransomware in an environment is ugly, right? And trying to get it back out is even uglier, and trying to restore is difficult. And then there's the double extortion where they're encrypting it and then they're offering to sell it, threatening to sell it on the dark web, which guess what? They do, right? It just happened with Change Healthcare, right? So you can't trust threat actors, and paying the ransom is not the best option. Yes, I know it's a business decision, and yes, you're bleeding money every day. But if you have great backups, if you have a good IR plan, then you don't need to pay the ransom, right? You go back, you restore your system, and you move on.
I think the elephant in the room as well that kind of extends on this, that has started to hit the narrative, has been, are we at a point where we need to start to legislate and say, legally speaking, you cannot pay? It's no longer a legally allowed thing. And there's been some critiques going back and forth on this one that I thought were interesting. Kieran Martin, who used to run the NCSC over in the UK, wrote a really good op-ed piece that I really enjoyed, talking about some of this, advocating for, basically making it illegal to pay. But the trick is, that isn't just the end of it, right? You can't just say, oh, paying's illegal. You need an entire legal framework and support mechanisms. And this needs to happen among many governments, like through CISA and through other organizations as well, so that there is some sort of a fallback framework to support actual victims, especially in the short term. If you just say that, ransomware payments are illegal, you're going to get some businesses to probably try to skirt the law, who want to try to not disclose, not call the FBI. Most of the time, their legal counsel is going to say, hey, don't commit more crimes. But sort of the other side of it is that the threat actors are probably going to get very aggressive in response to this, to try to prove their point that they can make this hurt a lot more if they really wanted to try to dissuade you from taking that course of making payments illegal. If you've taken away their sort of their money spigot, boy, they ain't going to be happy.
Yeah, no, and just to foot stomp that, right? Black Hat just did that with the Meridian attack, right? Where they actually signed on to the SEC's cyber disclosure website and actually told the SEC that they had infiltrated Meridian and actually filed the fact that they were a victim of ransomware. So you have a threat actor who's actively understands the SEC system, understands how that works, and actually files the threat for them. I mean, absurd.
Boy, you're freaking me out, James. Now our our threat adversaries are figuring out our insurance processes, they're figuring out our SEC regulations, and they're playing our own game,
Yes.
which is really scary.
Yeah.
All right, we got a good question from the audience here that just popped up from a Joseph. Does getting successfully attacked by ransomware get into the negligence situation from a legal perspective? What do you guys think about that? At what point is it negligence?
Well, let me, as the recovering lawyer in the room,
Please.
Yeah, look, there is. I've always been concerned, having worked this as many years as I had. Look, we shoot the hostage, and that bothers me. Right? You got victims out there that are just trying to run their businesses, and the whole concept of negligence. Yes, they probably was, certain things that they could have done. They could have spent more money. Doesn't really rise to the level of what I call cyber negligence. Now, if you're a bank, if you're a financial services organization, right, there are things, there are regulatory aspects out there, and if you're not meeting those regulatory standards, that's negligence. But I have always worried about the fact that we shoot the hostage. We come in after you've been victimized, and then we fine you, or we provide some kind of regulatory aspect to that. And Curtis was right on before about the whole concept of, if we legislate this, we have to have both the ability, especially for the small and medium-sized businesses, healthcare, right? Organizations out there who historically have never been able to spend the kind of money that financial services had on this, and provide them with, basic cybersecurity funding, right? Being able to help them meet that certain standard.
Curtis, any thoughts on that one?
It's a tricky one.
You can say no.
Going back to what we were talking about earlier with like IR planning, I remember some non-lawyers making the argument that IR plans should never be too detailed, because if you were too prescriptive in your actions for incident response plans and you didn't follow all of them, then somebody could discover your IR plan, take you to court, and say that you were negligent because you didn't do all of these steps or something like that, and all these other sort of odd pseudo legal things. So it's almost like a pain point for me, where I get a little frustrated when people are trying to prove negligence. And maybe that's just sort of where my mindset's more like, I'm more interested in fighting the fire, thanks. But it's a frustrating thing, because there are absolutely people who are trying to, play the blame game and try to pass off the blame or make it somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
Boy, what if we took that fine money and gave it to the security team, right? You got fined $10 million. Let's actually fund the security team well, instead of taking that money out.
Now you're talking my language here.
There we go. Let's get more budget. All right. Guys, I think that's all the time we have for today. Curtis, James, thank you for taking time out of your day and interacting with our community, being out here in LinkedIn Live. It's up to us to help bring these topics forward. It's up to us to help practitioners. It's up to everybody to raise the stakes of this game, so we can start pushing back against these organizations that are becoming much more professional than they used to. So thank you both for your time today. And as always, if there's anything in the chat window, we'll be cycling through those and publishing some answers and some more Q&A pieces. So that'll be up and running. And thank you all for coming.